Tom lived in a quiet neighborhood that was controlled by a strict homeowners association, also known as the HOA. The houses were neat, the grass was trimmed, and every mailbox looked the same. Tom had moved there 2 years ago because the neighborhood had one special thing that no other place nearby had: a small private lake. The lake was calm, peaceful, and full of fish. For Tom, it was not just water, it was part of his happiness. Tom grew up fishing with his father. Whenever he had free time, he would sit with his rod near the water, enjoying the silence. He never caused trouble, never left trash, and never disturbed anyone. The lake was at the back of his property, and he believed it was his right to enjoy it. But one morning, as Tom sat in his chair near the water with a fishing rod in his hand, a woman from the HOA walked toward him. Her name was Karen. She was known for her strict rules and for sending letters to neighbors whenever something was out of place. Some people feared her, some disliked her, but no one dared to openly argue with her. Karen looked at Tom with sharp eyes and said, "You are not allowed to fish here. The lake belongs to the association, and fishing is against the rules." Tom frowned. "This is behind my property. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just fishing." Karen shook her head. "Rules are rules. If you break them, you'll pay the fine." At first, Tom thought she was bluffing. How could anyone fine him for fishing in a lake that was connected to his own land? But a week later, an official letter arrived. It was from the HOA. The letter said he had violated the rules by fishing in the lake and that he had to pay a fine of $2,500. Tom was shocked. $2,500 for fishing? That was more than his monthly salary. He read the letter twice, hoping he had misunderstood, but the amount was clear. He tried to talk to the HOA board. He explained that he was not harming the lake, that fishing was peaceful, and that he had done it for years without any problem. But the board, led by Karen, refused to listen. They simply repeated that rules must be followed. Some neighbors whispered that Karen was pushing for the fine because she personally disliked Tom. Others said she enjoyed power and wanted to control every little detail in the neighborhood. Whatever the reason, the fine was real, and Tom had only two choices: pay or fight. Tom was not the kind of man to give up easily. Instead of getting angry, he started reading about the HOA, the lake, and how the water rights were managed. He spent evenings searching records online, looking at maps, and asking questions at the county office. Slowly, he discovered something interesting. The lake did not fully belong to the HOA. The association managed the land around it, but the actual water rights were not under their control. They had assumed it for years, but legally, the water could be sold, leased, or transferred. Tom's heart raced when he realized this. If he could somehow purchase the water rights, he would gain control over the very thing they were trying to keep him away from. The idea was crazy, but it was possible. Tom spoke with a lawyer to confirm what he had found. The lawyer looked through the documents and smiled. "You're right. The HOA doesn't own the water rights. If you want, you can make an offer to buy them from the current holder." Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling a mix of anger and excitement. The HOA had tried to take away his simple joy of fishing. Now, he had a chance not only to protect his right but also to turn the tables completely. For the next few weeks, Tom quietly worked on his plan. He saved money, contacted the person who owned the water rights, and negotiated the deal. The process was not easy, but Tom stayed patient. Every time he looked at the $2,500 fine letter, his determination grew stronger. Meanwhile, Karen continued to act as if she had already won. She told other neighbors that Tom would soon be forced to pay up and that rules always stood above personal wishes. She did not know that behind the scenes, Tom was preparing something much bigger than anyone expected. One calm evening, Tom stood by the lake again. He looked at the water and smiled. Soon, This would not just be a place he loved. It would be something he truly owned. The fine had started the fight, but now the lake was about to change everything. Tom knew the HOA was not expecting him to push back. Most people in the neighborhood simply gave in, paid the fines, and avoided trouble. But Tom was different. He had always believed in standing up for himself, and this time, he had something more powerful than anger. He had information. The lawyer he consulted gave him the documents that proved the HOA did not own the lake's water rights. The water rights had been sold decades ago to a private individual named Mr. Allen, who had since moved out of the state. The HOA still managed the land around the lake, but without water rights, their power was limited. Tom tracked down Mr. Allen through public records. After a few phone calls and emails, he was able to reach him. Mr. Allen was an older man now, retired and living far away. He was surprised to hear from Tom but also amused. "You want to buy the water rights to that little lake?" he asked. "Yes," Tom said calmly. "It means a lot to me. I fish there, and the HOA is trying to stop me. I think owning the rights will settle things." Mr. Allen chuckled. "I haven't thought about that lake in years. Honestly, it's just paperwork for me now. If you want it, I'll sell it to you." The price was fair, though not small. Tom would have to dip into his savings, but he believed it was worth it. He agreed, and the legal process began. His lawyer handled the paperwork carefully, making sure every step was official and clear. During those weeks, Tom acted as if nothing was happening. He kept quiet, went to work, and even avoided fishing so Karen and the HOA would think they had won. But inside, he felt stronger every day, knowing he was building towards something big. Karen, meanwhile, continued to show off her authority. At an HOA meeting, she spoke loudly about residents who refused to respect the rules. She didn't mention Tom's name, but everyone knew who she meant. Neighbors nodded politely, but some of them were beginning to feel she was going too far. After all, Tom was a kind man, always helping others, and never caused problems. One neighbor, a man named Paul, whispered to Tom after the meeting, "She's targeting you because she knows you won't bow down." But you're not alone, many of us don't agree with her. Tom smiled but kept his plan secret. He didn't want anyone to know until the time was right. Finally, after weeks of waiting, the deal was complete. Tom signed the last paper, and the lawyer handed him the document. "Congratulations, Tom," the lawyer said. "You now own the water rights to the lake." Tom held the paper with both hands. It felt heavier than it really was, as if the words written on it carried power. For the first time, he wasn't just a resident fighting an unfair fine. He was the rightful owner of something the HOA had falsely claimed to control. The next weekend, Tom returned to the lake with his fishing rod. He set up his chair, cast the line, and sat back with a calm smile. He knew Karen would appear, and he was ready. Sure enough, within minutes, Karen came storming down the path. "You again," she snapped. "Didn't I tell you this is against the rules? You're breaking them again, and this time, the fine will be even higher." Tom didn't argue. He simply reached into his bag, pulled out the document, and handed it to her. "I don't think so," he said softly. Karen frowned and scanned the paper. At first, her expression was confident, but as her eyes moved over the legal words, her face changed. Her voice trembled. This says you own the water rights." "That's right," Tom said. "This lake is no longer under your control. You can't stop me from fishing here. In fact, you and the HOA will now have to respect my ownership of the water." Karen's face turned red. She wanted to argue, but she had no words. She turned quickly and marched away, but Tom could hear her shoes hitting the ground harder than before. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. At first, people were shocked. Some laughed at the irony. The man who was fined $2,500 for fishing had turned the tables by buying the very thing the HOA tried to control. Neighbors came to Tom, shaking his hand and congratulating him. Many said they admired his courage. For Tom, it was not just about winning against the HOA. It was about fairness. He believed no one should be bullied by unnecessary rules, especially when they were based on false claims. Now, with the water rights in his name, he felt free again. But he also knew this was not the end. Karen was not the type to accept defeat quietly. She would try something else, and Tom needed to be ready. The lake was his, but the battle with the HOA was far from over. As Tom sat by the water that evening, he looked at the calm ripples under the fading light. He felt peace, but also determination. The fight had only begun, and he was ready for whatever came next. After Tom bought the water rights, the neighborhood felt different. People waved to him more often, and some even stopped to talk. Many admired how he had stood up to the HOA. To them, Tom was proof that rules could be challenged if they were unfair. But Karen was not ready to give up. She felt embarrassed that her plan had backfired. In every HOA meeting, she had been proud to show her authority. Now people whispered behind her back, saying she had lost to Tom. She could not accept that. One morning, Tom received another letter from the HOA. This time, it was not about fishing. It said his chair by the lake was unapproved outdoor furniture and violated community standards. The fine was smaller, only $200, but the message was clear. Karen was looking for new ways to pressure him. Tom shook his head and laughed. He knew the game had changed. The lake was his, and no letter could take that away. Still, he decided to attend the next HOA meeting. When Tom entered the community hall, the air was tense. Karen sat at the front with a pile of papers in front of her. She gave him a sharp look as if daring him to speak. The board members sat beside her, while the residents filled the chairs. Karen started the meeting with her usual serious tone. She spoke about lawn heights, mailbox paint, and parking spaces. Then she paused and raised her voice. We also have a problem with certain residents who think they are above the rules. Everyone knew she meant Tom. Tom stood slowly, holding the document that proved his water rights. He waited until the room was quiet. Then he spoke clearly. I respect rules when they are fair. But when rules are made to control people unfairly, I will not bow down. The HOA does not own the water. I do. And I will continue fishing on my lake. Some neighbors clapped softly. Karen's face turned red. This is unacceptable, she snapped. You may own water rights, but the land around the lake belongs to the association. We can still restrict access. Tom looked around the room. But I don't need access from your land. My property touches the lake. I can reach it without crossing HOA grounds. You cannot stop me. Murmurs spread across the room. People began nodding. Some even smiled. They had grown tired of Karen's strict control, and Tom's words gave them courage. Karen tried to argue, but the board members looked uneasy. One of them, a woman named Grace, finally spoke. Karen, maybe we should reconsider. Tom has done his homework. We don't want to waste time and money on something we cannot win. That night, Tom walked home with a calm heart. He had faced the HOA directly, and this time, the board itself seemed unsure. Still, he knew Karen would not stop. Days later, Tom noticed a new sign near the lake. It read, "Swimming, fishing, and boating are strictly prohibited by HOA rules." The letters were large and bold. Clearly, it was Karen's work. Tom smiled. Signs could not erase his legal rights. He took a photo of the sign and sent it to his lawyer. The lawyer assured him the HOA had no authority over the water. If they pushed further, Tom could even take legal action against them. Neighbors began visiting Tom more often. Paul, the friendly man from before, brought his children to see the lake. "It's beautiful here," he said. "We all wish the HOA would focus on real problems instead of small battles." Others agreed. Some even asked Tom if they could fish with him someday. Tom welcomed the idea, though carefully. He wanted to share the lake, but he also knew Karen would use any chance to twist things. One evening, as Tom fished quietly, Karen appeared again. This time, she was not shouting. She stood stiffly and said, "You think you've won, but this is not over. The board will find another way." Tom reeled in his line and looked at her calmly. "Karen, I don't want fights. I only want peace. The lake means something to me. Why not let it go?" But Karen said nothing more. She turned and walked away. Tom knew she was planning something bigger. He could feel it. She was not the type to walk away quietly. Later that night, Tom sat at his desk and thought deeply. Owning the water rights was powerful, but it was also a responsibility. If Karen pushed harder, the situation could grow into a larger conflict. Maybe he needed to prepare for the next step, something that would make the HOA think twice before challenging him again. The calm surface of the lake outside his window reflected the moonlight. It looked peaceful, but Tom understood the truth. Beneath that peace, a storm was slowly building. The lake had become the center of attention in the neighborhood. Some people admired Tom for standing his ground, while others were nervous about the tension between him and the HOA. Every time Tom walked near the water, neighbors whispered. Children pointed at him and said he was the man who beat the rules. But Karen was not finished. Her pride had been wounded, and she was determined to win back her control. She began searching for new ways to limit Tom. If she could not stop him from fishing, maybe she could trap him with other rules. One morning, Tom found a notice taped to his door. It claimed his backyard shed was too large and not painted in community-approved colors. The letter demanded he repaint it and threatened a $500 fine. Tom laughed softly as he read it. The shed had been there since before he moved in, and no one had ever complained. It was clear Karen was digging for excuses. Still, Tom kept all the letters in a folder, carefully saving them for evidence. His lawyer had told him, "The more pressure they put on you without reason, the stronger your case becomes." Meanwhile, Tom began to think about how he could use his new ownership of the water rights more wisely. Instead of keeping it quiet, maybe he should make it official. He visited the county office and requested that his name be listed publicly as the holder of the lake's water rights. Once the update was complete, he asked for copies of the records. Now he had proof not only in his hands but also in the government's books. The HOA could put up signs, send letters, or shout at meetings, but they could not change the truth. At the next HOA meeting, Tom sat quietly in the back while Karen spoke with her usual strict tone. She announced new safety rules around the lake, claiming that swimming and fishing were dangerous. She said anyone breaking those rules could face heavy penalties. Tom raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "You cannot make rules about something you do not own. The water rights are mine. If anyone has authority over the lake, it is me, not the HOA." Gasps filled the room. Karen tried to smile, but her voice shook as she replied, "The board has responsibility for the community. We can still protect residents." Tom stood and held up the official county record. "This says otherwise. If you continue making false claims, I may have no choice but to take legal action. And I will win." The room went silent. The board members looked at one another nervously. Grace, the kind woman from before, finally spoke. "Karen, I think we are wasting energy. This matter is clear now." Some residents even clapped. Others whispered their support to Tom. He felt a sense of strength, not just from owning the rights but from knowing the people were with him. Karen's eyes narrowed. She didn't speak further that night, but Tom knew she would not stop. She would look for another path. Over the next week, strange things began happening. A city inspector suddenly came to Tom's house, claiming to check if his deck was built according to code. Then a letter arrived about his mailbox being slightly taller than standard height. Tom recognized the pattern. Karen was using outside channels to pressure him. But Tom was ready. Each time, he showed the inspector or official his documents, receipts, and approvals. Nothing was truly wrong with his property. The visits wasted his time but never produced a fine. At the same time, Tom thought about his neighbors. They too suffered from strict HOA rules, though not as severely as he did. Many had been fined for leaving their trash bins out too long, planting flowers not on the approved list, or hanging clothes to dry in the backyard. One evening, Paul visited Tom again. "We're all tired of this," Paul said. "Karen is making life miserable for everyone. But you're the only one who has fought back successfully. Maybe it's time we all stand with you." Tom listened carefully. The idea of neighbors uniting against unfair rules was powerful. "If we work together, we can bring real change," he said. "The HOA board can be challenged. They don't hold unlimited power. But it requires courage." Paul nodded. "You've already shown us what courage looks like. Maybe the rest of us can follow." Tom realized the battle was no longer just about fishing. It was about fairness for the entire community. If Karen could target him today, she could target anyone tomorrow. By standing up, he could inspire others to do the same. That night, Tom sat by the lake again. The moonlight reflected on the water, calm but bright. He thought about his father, who had taught him fishing was not only about catching fish but also about patience and strength. Now, patience had brought him here, and strength would carry him further. The storm with Karen was not over, but Tom felt ready. With the lake by his side and neighbors beginning to stand with him, he knew the HOA's grip was starting to weaken. Karen might have power on paper, but Tom had truth, law, and growing support on his side. The next chapter of the fight would not just be Tom versus Karen. It would be the whole neighborhood deciding what kind of place they wanted to live in. The weeks that followed were full of quiet changes in the neighborhood. People who once avoided talking about the HOA now spoke openly. They whispered to each other during walks, at mailboxes, and in front yards. The story of Tom buying the lake's water rights had spread beyond the community, and many saw it as proof that the HOA's power could be challenged. Karen, however, grew more restless. She hated losing control. She was used to everyone following her orders without question, but Tom had cracked that wall. Every new rule she tried to enforce was met with more resistance than before. Even board members seemed less confident when they sat beside her at meetings. Tom noticed the shift as well. Paul came over one evening with a few neighbors. They sat on Tom's porch while the lake shimmered under the setting sun. "We've had enough," Paul said. "Karen cannot keep running things like a queen. We think it's time to push back as a group." Tom listened quietly. He wasn't the kind of man who liked leading big movements, but he understood what was happening. His fight had inspired others, and now they were looking to him for guidance. "What do you want to do?" Tom asked. Grace, the board member who had once defended him, answered. "The HOA is supposed to serve the residents, not punish them. If enough of us vote, we can replace the board. But people are afraid. They think Karen will retaliate." Tom nodded. "Fear only lasts until someone shows there's another way. If you all want change, I'll stand with you." The group agreed to meet again in secret. Over the next weeks, more neighbors joined the discussions. They shared stories of unfair fines. One woman had been charged for planting roses in the wrong color, another family fined for leaving bicycles on their porch. Everyone had their own tale of frustration. Tom realized something important. The lake had started his battle, but the heart of the problem was bigger. The HOA, under Karen's leadership, had forgotten its purpose. It was meant to care for the neighborhood, but instead it had become a tool for control. Meanwhile, Karen noticed people were gathering around Tom more often. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she sensed a challenge forming. Determined to crush it, she planned her boldest move yet. At the next HOA meeting, Karen announced a new community improvement fee. Every household would have to pay an extra $500 for lake maintenance. She claimed the funds were needed to keep the area safe and beautiful. The room erupted with murmurs. Residents looked at each other in disbelief. Many had never even used the lake, yet now they were being charged for it. Tom stood up slowly. "You cannot charge people for something you do not control," he said firmly. "The water rights belong to me. If maintenance is needed, it's my responsibility, not yours. This fee is unfair." Karen snapped back, "The lake is part of the neighborhood. Everyone must contribute." Tom raised the county record again, his voice steady. "The water is legally mine. If you try to collect this fee, it will be fraud. And I will not allow it." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then, to Tom's surprise, several neighbors stood and spoke. Paul said, "He's right. This is wrong." Grace added, "We can't keep pretending the board has authority it doesn't have." Others joined in, shaking their heads at Karen. The room felt different that night. It was no longer just Tom versus Karen. It was the community standing together. Karen's face was red with anger, but she forced a smile. "Fine. We'll revisit the fee later," she said. But her voice was thin, and her eyes betrayed her frustration. After the meeting, neighbors gathered around Tom outside the hall. "We're with you," one man said. "If there's a vote to replace the board, count on us." Tom thanked them but reminded everyone, "This isn't about me. It's about making our neighborhood fair. We deserve rules that make sense, not rules that punish us." That night, Tom sat by the lake again, the folder of letters and documents beside him. He thought about how far things had come since the first fine. What had started as a personal fight for fishing had grown into something larger, a battle for the spirit of the neighborhood. He felt both pressure and pride. Pressure, because the fight was getting bigger. Pride, because people believed in him. The moonlight touched the water gently, as if reminding him of his purpose. The lake had given him peace, and now it gave him strength. But Tom also knew one thing clearly. Karen would not back down easily. She had tried signs, fines, inspectors, and now a fake fee. Her next move would be even bigger. He had to be ready, not just for himself but for everyone who had put their hope in him. As the night grew quiet, Tom made up his mind. If Karen wanted a fight, this time it would not be one man versus one rule. It would be the entire neighborhood standing against her. And that was a battle she could not win. The neighborhood was no longer quiet. Conversations that once stayed behind closed doors now spilled into the streets. People openly complained about unfair fines, strict letters, and Karen's constant watch. The air carried a new energy, one of resistance and unity. Karen could feel it. She had lost much of the respect she once commanded. But instead of stepping back, she decided to push harder. She believed that if she could scare the residents enough, they would fall back in line. Her new plan came in the form of a long letter mailed to every house. It listed urgent violations across the neighborhood. Some were ridiculous mailboxes that were too shiny, grass that was too green, and curtains that were not in neutral colors. The letter threatened heavy fines and even legal action if the problems were not fixed. For many residents, this was the last straw. They were tired of living in fear of small mistakes. Dozens of them gathered at Tom's house that evening, carrying the letters in their hands. "This has to stop," Paul said firmly. "She can't keep treating us like children." Grace, the board member who had slowly grown distant from Karen, looked at Tom. "We need leadership. We need someone who can guide us to remove her from power." Tom hesitated. He was never a man who sought attention or control. He only wanted peace and fairness. But he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, tired, frustrated, but hopeful. They needed someone to stand for them. "All right," Tom said. "If we are going to change things, we need to do it the right way. The HOA rules give residents the power to vote out the board. It won't be easy, but if we stand together, we can do it." The neighbors agreed. Plans began to form. They would call for a special election, gather signatures, and demand a vote. It would take time, but it was possible. News spread quickly. Karen heard about the meetings and grew more furious. She tried to stop them by sending new warning letters and threatening lawsuits. But this time, people didn't back down. They ignored her threats and kept gathering at Tom's house. Meanwhile, Tom prepared carefully. He organized all the unfair fines and notices into a folder, ready to present them as evidence. He worked with his lawyer to make sure everything was legal and proper. If Karen tried to fight dirty, Tom wanted to be prepared. The night before the special meeting, Tom sat by the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the stars. He thought about how far things had come. From a simple wish to fish in peace, he had been pulled into a battle for fairness. He wondered what his father would say if he could see him now. Probably that he was doing the right thing. The next evening, the community hall was packed. More people showed up than ever before. Some stood in the back, holding papers and whispering nervously. The air was thick with tension. Karen sat at the front, her face stiff, trying to look confident. She started the meeting with a strong voice, listing rules and talking about order. But as she spoke, more people frowned, some shaking their heads. Then Tom stood up. He walked to the front slowly, holding the folder. The room went quiet. "I didn't want this fight," Tom began. "I moved here for peace, for the lake, for a good life. But I was fined $2,500 for fishing in water that legally belongs to me. And when I stood up for myself, the pressure only grew worse. Not just on me, but on many of you too. Look at these letters." He held up the folder and pulled out some notices. People fined for mailboxes, flowers, even curtains. This is not what a community should be. The HOA should serve us, not punish us. It's time for change. A ripple of applause spread through the room. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is nonsense. The board has authority. Without rules, this place will fall apart." Grace stood then. "Rules are fine when they are fair. But what we have now is control, not care. We deserve better." The crowd clapped louder. People began to shout their support. "We want a vote," someone called. "Replace the board," another shouted. Karen's face turned pale. She realized the room was no longer hers. For years, she had spoken and everyone had listened. But now, her voice was drowned out by the will of the people. Tom stepped back, letting the moment grow. He didn't need to force anything. The neighbors had found their courage. They were ready. By the end of the night, a petition had been signed by more than enough residents to demand a vote. The decision was set: in a few days, the neighborhood would choose whether to keep the current board or elect a new one. Karen left the hall quickly, not speaking to anyone. Tom watched her go, knowing she would not accept defeat quietly. She might still try one last desperate move. But for the first time, Tom felt the weight shift fully. It was no longer just his fight. It was everyone's. As he walked home under the night sky, Tom looked at the calm lake and smiled. Whatever happened next, he was no longer alone. The neighborhood had awakened, and together, they were stronger than any unfair rule. The days leading up to the vote were full of nervous energy. Neighbors talked on sidewalks, in driveways, and near the mailboxes. Some spoke with excitement, others with worry, but everyone knew something important was coming. For the first time in years, the HOA board's control was being tested. Karen tried to regain her power. She sent long emails warning that without her leadership, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. She posted notes on doors about how Tom was selfish and only cared about his lake. But instead of building fear, her words only annoyed people more. Residents were tired of threats. Tom stayed calm. He avoided arguments and focused on preparing for the vote. He met with neighbors, answered their questions, and reminded them why change was needed. "This is not about me," he said again and again. "It's about all of us living without fear of unfair fines." The evening of the vote arrived. The community hall was brighter than usual, with extra chairs brought in for the large crowd. Nearly every household was represented. People sat shoulder to shoulder, the room filled with quiet voices and nervous shuffling. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members. She wore her usual stiff smile, but her hands shook slightly as she sorted through papers. She opened the meeting with a long speech about respecting rules and keeping order. When she finished, Tom stood. He carried the same folder of letters and records he had shown before. His voice was steady. "We are not against rules. We are against unfair control. We deserve an HOA that helps, not one that punishes. Tonight, we decide what kind of neighborhood we want." He opened the folder and held up several notices. "Here are fines for flowers planted in the wrong color. Here are fines for children's toys left in yards. Here is a fine for fishing in a lake that legally belongs to me. Do you want this to continue?" The room murmured. People shook their heads. Someone called out, "No more," and others echoed the words. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "You think he cares about you? He only cares about himself and his fishing. Without my rules, your homes will lose value. This neighborhood will collapse." But her words no longer carried the same weight. Grace, the board member who had long disagreed with Karen, stood and faced the room. "I've sat on this board for years. I've seen how fear has been used against you. I believe we can do better. We can create a board that listens, that protects, that supports. The choice is yours." The vote began. Each household received a slip of paper. People lined up to drop their votes into a box at the front. The hall buzzed with low voices and shuffling feet. Tom sat quietly in the back, his hands folded, waiting. When the last slip was collected, the votes were counted. The room grew silent as numbers were read aloud. Finally, Grace lifted her head and spoke. "By a clear majority, the current board is removed. A new board will be formed." The room erupted in cheers. Neighbors clapped, hugged, and shook hands. Some even cried with relief. For the first time in years, they felt free. Karen's face was pale. She stood slowly, her voice sharp but trembling. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll see what happens without me." But no one listened. People turned their backs, focusing on their victory. Karen gathered her papers and stormed out of the hall. Tom remained seated, letting the noise wash over him. He felt no need to shout or cheer. A quiet satisfaction filled him. The fight had been long and tiring, but it was worth it. Later that night, Tom walked back to his house with Paul and a few others. They stopped by the lake, where the moonlight touched the water. Paul clapped Tom on the shoulder. "You started this," he said. "Without you, we'd still be afraid." "Thank you." Tom smiled. "I didn't do it alone. You all found your voices. That's what made the difference." Grace joined them, her face brighter than he had ever seen it. "The new board will be fair," she said. We'll set rules that make sense, rules that help, not punish. It won't be perfect, but it will be better. Tom looked at the calm lake. That's all I ever wanted. A place where people can live in peace. The group stood there for a while, listening to the quiet sounds of the night. The battle was over, but the neighborhood had gained something more important than victory. They had gained unity. As the others left, Tom remained by the water. He cast his fishing line, the ripples spreading gently across the lake. For the first time in months, he felt truly at peace. The lake was his, yes, but now it was also a symbol of freedom for the whole community. He thought of the fine that had started it all, the $2,500 punishment for fishing. What had once been an attempt to control him had instead brought change for everyone. The moon reflected on the water, and Tom smiled. Sometimes battles began in small ways, with a simple act like fishing. And sometimes, those small battles grew into something greater, something that changed lives. For Tom, the lake would always be more than water. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right could bring peace not just for one person, but for many.